Hi, everyone. Dr. Liparini here today to give you some more insight about attending, specifically the things that get in the way of us doing it effectively. And we're all guilty of this because we're human, and the way that we have been kind of socialized to interact, it's easy to encounter these barriers. So I am betting that these seem familiar to you, not just from the videos you've done so far for our class, but just in your everyday interactions. So I found a really great book called You're Not Listening by Kate Murphy. And in this book, she interviews individuals from all walks of life who are expert listeners, truly effective at creating connection. And they are from all different fields, occupations, life experiences, everyone from bartenders to hairstylists to CIA agents and operatives. So we're getting a wealth of experience from a very diverse interview pool. So, in her book, she talks about many of the barriers, and I've culled it down to the top 10 that I think apply to us and that maybe are relevant to me. But again, the top 10 barriers to effective attending. And I know we've talked about this, but I think it bears repeating. Why is listening and attending so important? Because when we're truly listening to somebody and really attending to their experience, it sparks interest in us, it sparks our creativity, our intuition, insight, knowledge, all those things for us as well as for our clients. So, effective attending, truly getting into someone else's experience is extremely valuable. And going back to one of our previous units where we talk about the kind of the biology or the neurobiology of listening and all these counseling skills we talk about, it's also really an opportunity for us to truly get on the same wavelength as someone else. Our brain waves can become in sync with the other when we are really listening, really attending. So I hope that sells you on why this is so important. But if it doesn't, let's talk about the barriers now and see if you can't relate to them and see why they can get in the way so much. Inauthenticity. So if you're acting as if you're attending or listening, you really aren't. And that comes across. It gets in the way of again, those brain waves being on the same wavelength, of really getting into the other person's experience. That's not going to happen if you're simply acting as if you're paying attention. And the best way to avoid that is to actually pay attention. I know, easier said than done. Our second barrier, thinking about how the conversation will go. I know, again, easier said than done, especially early in our career. I'm sure some of you can relate to this even from the video that you did, of wondering, how is this going to go? What are they going to talk about today? Can I handle it? All of those things are going to take us out of really listening and remaining open and curious to what the other person is saying. And those are ingredients that are really important to really listening and, again, attending. Anxiety. I'm sure you thought it was going to make the list, or if you didn't, it makes sense, right? Anxiety definitely gets in the way of us really listening to the other person. That could be, again, like I just mentioned, anxiety of what are they going to talk about? Can I handle this? When you think about anxiety, not just in session or in relationship to another person, when you think about your anxiety about anything, it really doesn't take us to good places, does it? We're picturing worst case scenarios, what ifs, usually distorted beliefs about something. So our anxiety fills in the gaps with almost like that worst case scenario information. So when you're thinking about listening to somebody, if you're anxious, you're not really going to be connected to them. It's just not possible. I remember one of my first sessions where I was so worried about how it was going to go with this client after reading the intake paperwork that I really didn't listen. I think the whole session was about me trying to tamp down the anxiety that was going on in my head. And every once in a while, I would kind of surface and hear a snippet of what the client was saying, but by no means was I really listening. And it really did not create rapport with that client. And it felt like a true disaster to me. And I think to the client as well. So even though I didn't, I was a novice counselor at that point, if I had been able to put that anxiety kind of contain it a bit better, I'm sure that session would have been more successful, at least in building that rapport. Now, number 4, this is about the client. So not so much about what we're bringing in now, but also about the client. So we can have a client that gives us so much information, too much information to process. We can wonder, why is this client even telling us this? What does this have to do with anything? I've given examples of the kind of everyday things clients might spend a good 15, 20 minutes of the session talking about, shoe shopping, whatnot, that really don't pertain to getting the work done in counseling. So when a client is giving you all of this information, Murphy, who wrote this book, talks about being the detective. So when a client is giving us all this information, we really need to ask ourselves, why is this person telling me this? Why now? Why are they even sharing this? We have to understand also that sometimes the client may not know why they're sharing it. So it's our job to really be the detective as well. Instead of dismissing it, sometimes the extraneous extra information, too much information does have valuable information, especially sometimes when we look for the connection between lots of those pieces of information. A theme or pattern may develop that gives us some more insight and can also help the client get some more insight. So don't dismiss all the TMI. There might be some valuable information or insight in there. But yes, it gets in the way of us really listening when we feel like we're being bombarded with so much information and it doesn't feel, overtly relevant. Number 5, false assumptions. We all like order and consistency, which is why this last year has been so hard for all of us. There hasn't been any order and consistency, or it's been very hard to find. So out of that need for order and consistency, we jump to assumptions to make sense of things. And it turns out we're really bad at that. We have a tendency to make really bad assumptions. And what's even more troubling is we tend to think we don't do that, but other people do that. So we are really good at hypothesizing or maybe even identifying in others false assumptions they've made, but we have a real blind spot to our own. It's kind of like, they're really bad at that, but I'm pretty insightful. I don't jump to assumptions, but it turns out we're just as guilty as others. So our blind spot of our own tendency to do that is something that we need to be aware of. So something to keep in mind. Number 6, something called the speech-thought differential. And Murphy mentions this as something that happens to a lot of us simply because we think faster than someone is talking. And because of that, we're not going at the same speed and we have time in our minds to kind of wander. And it results in what she calls mental side trips. So we can find ourselves off somewhere, coming back to when the client is speaking and having missed something because we have taken one of those mental side trips. And the problem with this, she mentions, is also that it makes us, when we're doing that, we're really wondering about our own experiences and kind of our own concerns. And it takes us out of, ideally, the wonder and concern we have for the other person, which is what leads to really effective listening, as we mentioned, as we talked about at the beginning of this, of when we're really listening, that sparks wonder and curiosity. And that's not going to happen when we're on those mental side trips. 7, so you're on that mental side trip. What happens when you come back? You're filling in the gaps. You're trying to figure out what happened while I was away. And you're taking your cues from the other person. Do they look excited, sad? What just happened? How should I be feeling based upon how they seem to be feeling, or what they're talking about, based upon when I left to when I returned? What was going on when I left, and what's going on now, and how can I make sense of what happened in between? Guess what? We're really bad at that too. So again, when we're turning from mental side trips, we often unconsciously and incorrectly fill in those gaps. Number 8, for all my smarties out there, this is one of the cons, I guess, of being smart, as Murphy talks about, which is when we are really intelligent or smart, we tend to be more prone to some things, such as those mental side trips. And we also tend to worry more. And that goes back to anxiety. So we're really conscious about our performance and wanting to do well. So we're more prone to worry. And we're also more likely to get caught up in that differential again and think that we know what that other person has said. And we're even worse at filling in the gaps. So being smart is something that we want to encourage you to be smart and to celebrate that, but just being aware of how prone we are to some of these barriers to truly listening. And Murphy says that, smart people are often worse listeners because they come up with more extra stuff to think about. And that leads us to those side trips. And again, we tend to be confident, assuming that we even know what the other person is going to say. This is something I'm really guilty of, and something that I've been working on for the past 6 months or so since I read this book, which is I am an interrupter. I think it shows people that I'm really listening and understanding them if I finish their sentences. Clearly, that was a blind spot until I read this book and realized that probably people aren't appreciating that, and that it is actually getting in the way of them feeling like they're able to share their story and I'm with them. So if you're one of those people who finishes other people's sentences because you want to show just how much you know and know about them, be careful about that. Okay. Number 9, introversion. I am more on the side of introvert than I am extrovert. So this is something that I catch myself, especially when I was working full time in a clinical capacity, the end of the day feeling really depleted, because as an introvert, you have so much already going on internally in your head that a lot of mental energy is taking place there. So imagine now taking on, trying to really listen to someone and stay present. You're more, those side trips can happen more because there's already so much stuff going on in there. And we reach saturation sooner of the energy it takes to really be with someone else and hold all of what they're giving us and the energy from them. We can reach saturation a little bit sooner. It's hard for us to make room for all that extra input. And last, but certainly not least, drum roll, number 10, focusing on the right thing to say. We want to get it right. We want to be good counselors. We want to be effective. And we also want our client, we want to inspire confidence in our clients. So we want to say the right thing. Murphy says, the more you think about the right thing to say, the more you miss and the more likely you'll be to say the wrong thing when it's your turn. So again, it takes us out of the interaction when we're focusing so hard on finding the right thing to say. So when it's your turn, you want to have not taken those mental side trips. You want to have been with the client and able to genuinely, authentically respond. So I hope that you found these top 10 barriers helpful in thinking about not just your counseling relationships that you'll be developing, but your personal relationships. So for my interrupters out there, or my people who take a lot of mental side trips, this is something you can work on. And I encourage you to maybe even just pick one to be more intentional about in the coming months. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you soon.